Welcome to episode 4 of Project 250, a weekly chronicle of the people, places, and events of the American Revolution, in the order they occurred. So, without further ado, here's what was happening 250 years ago this week, January 22nd to 28th, 1775. Last week, the Committee of Observation of Elizabethtown, New Jersey, sought to increase the local sheep population by limiting the harvesting of sheep and lambs. Meanwhile, at nearby Shrewsbury, New Jersey, a public meeting chose not to form a committee of observation, as it was seen as a potential source of discord. The South Carolina Provincial Congress adjourned while Georgia's Provincial Congress discussed whether to send delegates to the upcoming Second Continental Congress. However, disagreements over the best course of action rendered the idea moot. The Continental Congress's petition to the King was finally presented to Parliament but was lost in the sheer volume of incoming American legal documents and newspapers, and was therefore never acted upon and probably never presented to the King. As the week ended, John Adams wrote to a friend in London, giving his assessment of the state of affairs in Boston. Lastly, Yemelyan Pugachev, leader of a Russian peasant rebellion, was executed in Moscow. We begin this week in Boston where attorney John Adams, writing as Navanglis, pens a letter to the Boston Gazette and Country Journal, addressed to the inhabitants of the colony of Massachusetts Bay. The letter was a response to Daniel Leonard's Massachusettensis letter of December 26, 1774, in which Massachusettensis, who Adams mistakenly believed to be Jonathan Sewell, had severely criticized the Patriot cause, claiming that the people were sure to be the losers in the end. In fact, the best that people could expect from the Patriots was to be tossed aside when no longer useful. The worst that people could expect would be confiscation of their property and an ignominious death, should they lose. But even if they prevailed against Britain, their own army was likely to be turned against them and subjugate them to a worse tyranny than the one they had rebelled against. On the contrary, Adams argued that if the people were unsuccessful, they would hardly be losers since had they remained alive they'd have been reduced to slavery, which would have happened anyway had they not resisted. On the other hand, if people were killed, they would still not be losers, for death is better than slavery. However, if successful, their gains would be immense, since they would preserve their liberties. In Annapolis, Thomas Johnson, a lawyer and political ally of George Washington, writes in regard to one of Washington's favorite topics, a proposed Potomac River navigation bill. Johnson pledges to make every effort to encourage Maryland to pass a bill similar to one recently passed in Virginia. And while nothing came of the idea at the time, improvements to Western navigation, particularly on the Potomac River, would remain a pet project of Washington's for years to come. Even so, military matters and the prospect of confrontation with England were not far from either man's mind, with Johnson taking note.
There has been more alacrity shown by our people than I expected, but we are but illy prepared with arms, etc. I am apprehensive that the vigilance of the government at home will make it necessary for us to turn our thoughts towards an internal supply of materials.
On January 25th, Boston merchant William Phillips wrote to his son-in-law, Josiah Quincy Jr., offering his assessment of the current state of American affairs, or at least how things stood in Boston. Phillips reported that the demeanor of British troops had been much better than expected but warned that, quote, a storm seems to be gathering, due to the conduct of some officers. Phillips noted that significant efforts were being made to divide the people, but with little success, as the residents remained as determined as ever. Phillips had good reason to be skeptical of British intentions. Governor Thomas Gage had rejected his election to the Governor's Council the year before. Quincy, who was married to Phillips's daughter Abigail, also had cause for concern regarding British motives, having served as John Adams's co-counsel during the Boston Massacre trials. The following day, an item appeared in James Rivington's New York Gazetteer, credited to a Jersey farmer and written on behalf of many of my good honest neighbors, which proposed the establishment of a Loyalist association to counter the activities of the Continental Congress, Sons of Liberty and similar Whig organizations, whose actions the writer claimed were highly derogatory to the honor and dignity of the King, Parliament, and subversive of the legal constitution and government, and likely to result in the most dreadful calamities and mournful events. Since neither the Jersey farmer nor his neighbors had ever voted for or agreed to the resolves or proceedings of the Continental Congress, they did not consider themselves bound by its resolutions and regulations which were inconsistent with their allegiance to the King and the laws of Great Britain. Ultimately, the Loyalists' efforts to organize, which were rather scattered and confused, never went beyond the discussion stage, at least for the time being. In fact, no Loyalist organizations existed in New Jersey prior to the summer of 1776. Finally, at week's end, in Chowan County, North Carolina, 3 men, William Roberts, John Ellis, and Dempsey Bond, were summoned before the local Committee of Safety for violating the 8th Article of the Continental Association. Specifically, the 3 men were accused of operating a horse race and made to sign the following confession.
We do therefore most heartily and sincerely declare and profess that we are sorry for our misconduct, and in order that proper atonement be made, do promise that in future we shall strictly observe every article of the association and hope by such behavior to be reinstated in the esteem and favor of our countrymen and acquaintance which we have justly forfeited by our misbehavior.
But more importantly than merely shutting down one horse race, the episode demonstrated that the Continental Association, and by extension, the Continental Congress itself, was starting to assume the functions of a national government, one that was fully capable of enforcing its rules and regulations. And that's the way it was 250 years ago this week. If you enjoyed this video, please tell a friend. And if you like what you see on this channel, make sure to like, share and subscribe. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter, or X or whatever they're calling themselves these days. You can also find us on Substack. Thank you for watching.